Hi everyone, welcome back to LM Teaches English, and this is lesson 5 of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time by Simon Stevens, and this is the play script. So last lesson we were looking at, it was quite a short one, quite a straightforward one hopefully, we were looking at the neighbourhood and the suspects of the crime that's been committed of Wellington's murder. And we went around the neighbourhood and we got to meet all of the neighbours, and especially interesting was the way that they interacted with Christopher. So a lot of them seemed to deal with Christopher and sort of tell him to go back to his father, and some of them were kind of confused. And it's interesting to see, I suppose, how people interact with people who are on the spectrum. I think being autistic or being on the autistic spectrum, it's not always obvious straight away that this person may have a, don't like to use this word, maybe it's incorrect, please do comment and tell me if I'm wrong, but I was going to say the word disability. So it's not perhaps obvious from the outside that this person has a disability, so people initially talk to Christopher as if he is neurotypical. And then once they get to understand that he's not understanding them or processing information in the same way as they might, they then either become fed up, exasperated, annoyed, frustrated with him, or they kind of change their way they're talking to him. And some of them, as we saw with Mrs. Alexander, begin to patronise him as if he's a child, which you can imagine he'd find very annoying because he's not a child and he's not stupid either, so you can imagine that getting on his nerves, even if you can't verbalise that. So bear that in mind when you're meeting new characters in this play, when their new characters are introduced. How do they interact with Christopher, and what maybe bigger question is Simon Stevens, the playwright, trying to pose to us here? Is he trying to say to us, you know, imagine how this would feel, imagine if you were treated this way? I don't think he's sort of raising awareness about autism. I think there's plenty of awareness around autism, but perhaps he's more raising awareness about how it feels and how best to interact with people who are autistic. Anyway, today's lesson is mostly about Ed as a parent. So if you're making notes as we're going, then your title is Ed. If not, your task for the end of this, once we've read this section, and we're starting from page 20 and we're up to page 26 today, your task will be to find as many quotes as you can for Ed as a parent. So we can make this black and white if you like, and we can make it good parent, bad parent, and you can have 2 columns in your page and then come to some kind of a conclusion, or you can just find a series of comments and quotes and evaluate each one as you go. You know, I think it's an important discussion to have as well. If you are able to have a discussion with people in your household, then do. If not, it's a good thinking opportunity. What makes a good parent? Is there a one-size-fits-all? Is there these are the characteristics of a good parent? Or is it different depending on every single child? And obviously, a good parent to me might be somebody who encourages reading and likes going to the theatre, but to you that might be your idea of a terrible parent. So maybe it's not a one-size-fits-all thing, and especially with someone like Christopher, who has different needs and perhaps needs help being reminded to do things. Perhaps he's got a bad memory, as is some typical... he's actually got a very good memory, I don't know why I said that, but, you know, these different needs that he has, parents have to adapt around them. So it's interesting, I think, before we judge Ed as a parent, it's interesting, I think, to weigh that up and to consider again how you might react. So let's have a read and then have a talk, and then I'll set up your next, we'll talk a little bit more about your next task. So should have read this bit last lesson because it links to Mrs. Alexander, who's gone to get some biscuits for Christopher and he's walked away. But this is Siobhan narrating it, so we'll read it now. She, Miss Alexander, moved very slowly because she was an old lady, and she was inside the house for more than 6 minutes, and I began to get nervous because I didn't know her well enough to know whether she was telling the truth about getting orange squash and Battenberg cake, and I thought she might be ringing the police, and then I'd get into much more serious trouble because of the caution, so I walked away. The company cheer as if a goal has been scored. Yay! Why would you kill a dog? I wouldn't. I think you would only kill a dog if A, you hated the dog, or B, if you were mad, or C, because you wanted to make Mrs. Shears upset. I don't know anybody who hated Wellington, so if it was A, it was probably a stranger. I don't know any mad people either, so if it was B, it was also probably a stranger, right? But most murders are committed by someone who is known to the victim. In fact, you are most likely to be murdered by a member of your own family on Christmas Day. Is that a fact? Yes, actually, it is a fact. Wellington was therefore most likely to have been killed by someone known to him. I only know one person who didn't like Mrs. Shears, and that is Mr. Shears, who divorced Mrs. Shears and left her to live somewhere else, and who knew Wellington very well indeed. This means that Mr. Shears is my prime suspect. Christopher, I'm going to find out more about Mr. Shears. Mr. Boone, nobody has ever taken an A-level in the school before. He can be the first then. I don't know if we have the facilities in the school to allow him to do that. Then get the facilities. I can't treat Christopher differently to any other student. Why not? Because then everybody would want to be treated differently. So, it would set a precedent. Christopher can always do his A-levels later when he's 18. Christopher is getting a crap enough deal already, don't you think, without you shitting on him from a great height as well. Jesus, it's the one thing he's really good at. We should talk about this later, maybe on our own. Are there things which are too embarrassed to say them to me in front of Christopher? No, it's not that. Say them now then. If Christopher sits an A-level, then he would have to have a member of staff looking after him on his own in a separate room. I'll pay for it. They could do it after school. Here, 50 quid, is that enough? Mr. Boone, I'm not going to take no for an answer. Ed turns to Christopher. Where have you been? I've been out. I've just had a phone call from Mrs. Shears. What the hell were you doing poking around her garden? I was doing detective work trying to figure out who killed Wellington. How many times do I have to tell you, Christopher? I've told you to keep your nose out of other people's business. I think Mr. Shears probably killed Wellington. I will not have that man's name mentioned in my house. Beat. Everybody on stage pauses to look at Ed and Christopher. Why not? That man is evil. Does that mean he might have killed Wellington? Jesus wept. I know you told me not to get involved in other people's business, but Mrs. Shears is a friend of ours. Well, she's not a friend anymore. Why not? Okay, Christopher. I'm going to say this for the last and final time. I will not tell you again. Look at me when I'm talking to you, for God's sake. Look at me. You are not to go asking Mrs. Shears who killed that bloody dog. You are not to go asking anyone who killed that bloody dog. You are not to go trespassing on other people's gardens. You are to stop this ridiculous bloody detective game right now. I'm going to make you promise me, Christopher, and you know what it means when I make you promise. I know. Promise me that you will give up this ridiculous game right now, okay? I promise. I think I would make a very good astronaut. Yes, mate, you probably would. To be a good astronaut, you have to be intelligent, and I'm intelligent. You also have to understand how machines work, and I'm good at understanding how machines work. You also have to be someone who would like being on their own in a tiny spacecraft thousands and thousands of miles away from the surface of the Earth and not panic or get claustrophobic or homesick or insane. And I really like little spaces so long as there is no one else in them with me. I noticed. Sometimes, when I want to be on my own, I get into the airing cupboard and slide in beside the boiler and pull the door closed behind me and sit there and think for hours, and it makes me feel very calm. So I'd have to be an astronaut on my own or have my own part of the spacecraft that no one else could come into. And also there are no yellow things or brown things in spacecraft, so that would be okay too. And I would have to talk to other people from mission control, but we would do that through a radio link-up and a TV monitor, so it wouldn't be like real people who are strangers, but it would be like playing a computer game, which you like. Also, I wouldn't be homesick at all because I'd be surrounded by lots of things I like, which are machines and computers in outer space, and I would be able to look out of a little window in the spacecraft and know that there was no one else near me for thousands of that. Christopher, what? Could you please just give it a bit of a break, mate? Please? and know that there was no one else near me for thousands and thousands of miles, which is what I sometimes pretend at night in the summer when I go and lie in the lawn and look up at the sky, and I put my hands around the sides of my face so I can't see the fence and the chimney and the washing line, and I can pretend I'm in space. And all I could see would be stars, and stars are the places where the molecules that life is made of were constructed billions of years ago. For example, all the iron in your blood, which stops you being anemic, was made in a star. And I would like it if I could take Toby with me into space, and that might be allowed because they sometimes do take animals into space for experiments. So I could think of a good experiment you could do with a rat that didn't hurt the rat. I could make them let me take Toby, but if they didn't let me, I would still go because it would be a dream come true. Right, is that where we're stopping? Yes, I said to... No, let's finish this bit actually because this is a little bit more about Ed. So, Christopher, father said, I see, that's a pity. So the book is finished. Well, Christopher, if your father said he wanted you to stop, then I think he probably has a good reason, and I think you should stop. But you can still be very proud because what you've written so far is just, well, it's great. It's very short. Well, some very good books are very short. It's not a proper book. Why not? It doesn't have a proper ending. I never found out who killed Wellington, so the murderer is still at large. Not all murders are solved, Christopher. Not all murderers are caught. I don't like the idea that he could be living somewhere nearby and that I might meet him when I go out for a walk at night. I don't think that's going to happen, Christopher. Father said I was never to mention Mr. Shear's name in our house again, and that he was an evil man, and maybe that meant he was the person who killed Wellington. Christopher, I think you should do what your father tells you to do. Okay, so Ed, lots of interesting stuff about Ed here, but also again, lots of interesting stuff about Christopher. So if you're doing kind of ongoing notes for Christopher, I would suggest adding some things to that. So we've got that whole lovely section about him wanting to be in space and how much it means to him to be on his own and how he doesn't like strangers. So these are all really important character building traits that will help us understand Christopher and also build on the plot as well. They'll become useful later on in the storyline. Siobhan, again, being a great teacher, just reminding Christopher. It's interesting because previously she's kind of said to Christopher, asked him questions to help him come to conclusions on his own, but now she's outright saying, I think you should do what your father tells you to do. So that's as close as she'll come to telling Christopher what to do. It still includes a hedge there, I think, and should. She's not using imperative verbs like do this. It's still very much suggesting and not wanting to upset Christopher. Interestingly, our protagonist, I'll come to Ed in a second, but I like this point. Our protagonist, Christopher, earlier on said that he doesn't tell lies. And I think we kind of accepted that, didn't we? And we kind of feel like, yeah, Christopher didn't kill Wellington. We accept that because we trust him. He's our protagonist. But now his father made him promise that he wouldn't investigate the death of Wellington. And he's already saying, hinting that he might carry on. And I think as a reader, we know that he will, because otherwise, as he said, this story will not have a resolution, and that's what we're all expecting as readers or as an audience. So there is dramatic irony loosely here. So he's kind of saying, he said earlier he'd never lie, but I think we've just got our lie from Christopher. So going back to this idea of, again, no offence, typical teenager, perhaps lying to your parents, or, lying, misleading or not telling your parents the whole truth is something that teenagers maybe have to do from time to time, especially when their parents are overprotective. So perhaps you could add that down into your notes for typical teenager. But okay, going on to Ed, and we've just got a minute left now. We've got so much to go on with Ed here, and I think if you are looking at this in a black and white fashion as Ed being good versus bad, the fact that he helps Christopher with that head teacher and he wants Christopher to do the A-level, that shows how much Ed cares about Christopher's interests and his hobbies. So that's a really good point. However, if we are evaluating that particular point, then we could look at the negative side of that as well. The way that he perhaps speaks to Mrs. Gascoigne in front of Christopher. Christopher is there, he does say in front of Christopher, and he swears at her as well. Perhaps that's not really setting a very good example for Christopher, that this is how you speak to teachers as how you speak to people. So weigh the points up when you have a look at them. So you're going to have a look at the character of Ed for this session, please, and you're going to decide whether he's a good or a bad parent. You're going to evaluate what kind of parent he is. All right, I'm going to leave it there. See you later. Bye.